Imagine a world where the most precious currency wasn't talent or beauty, it was access. In the gilded cages of classic Hollywood, the biggest names weren't just acting in movies, they were acting for the cameras while waging a silent war behind closed doors. What the fan magazines painted as fairy tale romances were often strategic transactions, and the whisper networks on studio lots told a much darker, more electric truth. We're peeling back the velvet curtains to reveal 10 legendary divas who redefined scandal. These women didn't just break the rules, they made the men in power rewrite them, using desire as a weapon and bedrooms as boardrooms. We're not talking about gentle, romantic flings. This is about a mobster bleeding out on a pink shag carpet, a secret ledger raiding hundreds of lovers with scientific precision, and a marriage so shocking that even the most hardened studio fixers threatened to walk. This isn't a list of victims. These were predators in silk gowns, architects of chaos who understood that in a town built on illusion, intimacy was the ultimate shortcut to power. Who ended up a multimillionaire, who died alone, and whose insatiable appetite literally got a man killed. The answers will rewrite everything you thought you knew about the Golden Age. We start with the ultimate cautionary tale, a story where the bedroom door swung so violently it ended in a killing floor. Lana Turner was discovered on a stool at a soda fountain, but that sweater girl image was a fragile mask for a life defined by sheer, unrelenting chaos. To call her life complicated is an understatement. She was married 8 times, but those were just the legal technicalities. The real Lana was a hurricane who left a trail of wrecked marriages and broken oaths long before a knife ever appeared. She lost her virginity at 16 to a much older attorney, a transaction that taught her the brutal arithmetic of Hollywood, that anything could be given if access was granted. By 19, the first divorce was already final, setting a template for a lifetime of disposable vows. An exhausted MGM publicist once confessed that while the studio could control marquees and the magazine covers, they were powerless to control whose bed Lana occupied at 3 a.m. Her specialty was married men, a destructive game where the prize wasn't love, but proof that her magnetism was potent enough to annihilate a family. Directors watched in horror as she conducted affairs with co-stars and husbands simultaneously, blurring the lines between scripted passion and domestic warfare. But this game of musical chairs turned lethal when she stepped into the orbit of mobster Johnny Stompanato. He was connected, violent, and obsessive. On Good Friday in 1958, their toxic brawl reached a fever pitch in her Beverly Hills home. As Stompanato's threats turned physical, Lana's terrified 14-year-old daughter, Cheryl, grabbed a kitchen knife in a desperate attempt to save her mother. Stompanato bled out on the bedroom floor. The world exploded. While the killing was ruled justifiable homicide, it was Lana's sexual history, not the self-defense, that was put on trial in the press. But here's the haunting punchline. Even after watching her child be forced to kill to protect her, the cycle wouldn't break. She married 3 more times, desperately chasing the phantom of love, but always snared in a trap of fleeting lust. She died in 1995, leaving behind a legacy written not just in divorce papers, but in blood that never psychologically washed away. Yet, while Lana left a trail of tragedy, our next diva left a chillingly organized logbook of physical satisfaction that would make a mathematician blush. Marlene Dietrich transcended simple beauty. She was a weapon of geometric precision. With cheekbones that looked like they could cut glass, and a voice that poured out like smoked honey, she conquered Hollywood, but what the studio couldn't sanitize was her intellectual, almost clinical approach to seduction. Marlene didn't rely on vague memories of her conquests. She carried a literal little black book. This wasn't a metaphor for a phone directory. It was a leather-bound ledger where she curated names, dates, and absolutely devastating performance reviews. Her daughter, Maria Riva, confirmed its existence, revealing that Marlene graded her lovers like a scientist cataloging specimens. One entry might read, "Beautiful but selfishly boring," while another coldly stated, "Too possessive, terminated before complication." This wasn't romance, this was quality control on a massive scale. During World War II, her USO tours became legendary for reasons the government never officially acknowledged. A soldier's intercepted letter home, boasting of hours spent in her trailer, was buried by military censors before it could destroy a marriage. By the time the letter was read, Marlene was already at the next base, likely adding the soldier to her book with a rating he'd never see. She was openly fluid decades before such a concept entered polite conversation, famously dismissing the gender binary by saying, "We make love with individuals, not genders." Directors like the tyrannical Joseph von Sternberg fell into her trap, believing they were her singular muse, only to be discarded the moment her career, utility, was satiated. Even into her 70s, the need for collection didn't dim. She was proud of the inventory, a woman who turned her reputation into a trophy case of memory. But while Marlene meticulously catalogued the powerful, our next diva was using a boarding house bed to simply learn how to survive the seedy underbelly of the studio system. On the surface, Joan Blondell was the girl next door, the wisecracking, blue-eyed blonde who lit up Depression-era screens in those escapist gold diggers' fantasies. She had a one-of-the-boys energy that made her seem safe and approachable, but that warmth masked a ruthless predator's instinct for availability. A veteran Warner Brothers cameraman once revealed the terrifying power of her focus, saying Joan could make you forget you had a wife in 3 sentences. By the 4th sentence, you were already mentally planning the logistics of an affair. On the set of Gold Diggers of 1933, the crew had a dark nickname for her, a vulgar acknowledgement of her appetite that management worked overtime to suppress. They knew that her comedic timing was sharp, but her ability to ghost a married man the second he left her trailer was sharper. She once left a smear of unmistakable red lipstick on a co-star's collar as a territorial stamp, knowing full well it would be discovered. When the furious wife stormed the set the next day, ready for a public catfight, Joan didn't flinch. She smiled sweetly, wished the woman a lovely good morning, and glided back to the lights as if the paint on her lips wasn't the same shade currently destroying a marriage. Over 5 decades and 100 credits, she married 3 times, to cinematographer Dick Powell and Mike Todd, but the institution of marriage was merely a backdrop to her primary hobby. Fidelity wasn't a broken promise. It was a concept that simply didn't exist in her psychological makeup. Her career survived because she was funny enough to be forgiven, proving you could be the town's worst-kept secret as long as you kept the punchlines coming. But while Joan kept it playful on the lots, our next star was crossing a line so taboo in her private life that even Hollywood, a town with no shame, never fully forgave her. Gloria Graham was film noir incarnate, that baby doll voice, those pouty lips, and the wounded eyes of a damaged angel. Directors cast her repeatedly as the femme fatale who destroys good men from the inside out. They had no idea they were barely scratching the surface of her reality. Gloria didn't just play at being dangerous. She was a collector of broken souls, and her trophies often came from within her own family home. The pattern began with director Nicholas Ray. Their marriage was a stormy, artistic battleground, but the true scandal was revealed when Ray came home early one afternoon. He found Gloria in a state of undress, and his companion wasn't a stranger. It was his own 13-year-old son from a previous marriage. The divorce was instantaneous, and the whispers about the stepson incident became a toxic fog around her career. Yet, the worst was yet to come. This wasn't a fleeting, shameful mistake to be buried. Years later, when that boy had grown into a man of 23, Gloria Graham married him. She legally married the child she had been caught with when he was barely a teenager. The studio system, which had previously hidden murders and abuse, didn't know how to spin this. It was a psychological transgression that defied the standard morality clause cleanup. On set, she was a whirlwind of brief, intense disappearances into dressing rooms, returning with perfect lipstick while the men she left behind crumbled. A grip described her as possessing a terrifying ability to look through you, instantly identifying your weaknesses and exactly how to exploit them. She lived fast, took what she wanted without recognizing any social boundaries, and died at 57, never able to escape the shadow of that specific, chilling marital choice. But while Gloria shocked the world with a wedding ring, our next icons simply bypassed marriage alto. While others traded passion for screen time, Paulette Goddard traded it for real estate, diamonds, and a bank account that outlived every man she touched. Starting as a Ziegfeld girl with dazzling legs and even more dazzling smile, she didn't just understand the game. She mastered it like a chess grandmaster playing against amateurs who didn't even know they were at the board. A Paramount executive once marveled that Paulette grasped a truth most starlets ignored: who you sleep with builds a career faster than what you appear in. Her Hollywood mansion hosted legendary parties that began with champagne and ended with bedroom doors locked until dawn. Married guests arrived clinging to their spouses and left with phone numbers hidden in their pockets, the ink still fresh. Her first major strategic move was Charlie Chaplin. Marrying him gave her a name, a platform, an entry into circles she'd only dreamed of. The moment bigger opportunities appeared on the horizon, the marriage dissolved like morning fog. Then came actor Burgess Meredith. Same cold calculation, same efficient exit. Finally, she set her sights on Erich Maria Remarque, the German literary giant whose novel, All Quiet on the Western Front, had made him an international treasure. He had millions. She had patience. When he died, she inherited everything. Properties across continents, investments that would compound for decades, a financial fortress built entirely on her terms. Her filmography was respectable, over 50 films including classics like The Women and The Great Dictator. But that wasn't the real portfolio. When Paulette Goddard died in 1990, her estate was valued at $20 million, virtually none of it originating from acting salaries. She never pretended to be a romantic. She never apologized for treating marriage certificates like renewable business licenses. She slept her way not to the marquee, but directly to the vault. And as she lay on silk sheets in her Swiss chalet, counting returns that required no further auditions, she must have smiled at how perfectly the system had been played. Yet while Paulette counted dollars in private, our next diva was counting conquests out loud at dinner parties, her bourbon-soaked voice declaring numbers that made even hardened producers choke. Tallulah Bankhead didn't whisper her sins. She announced them like film credits, with a cigarette burning between her fingers and a bourbon glass sweating onto the tablecloth. That gravelly, smoke-scarred voice could strip paint, and those hungry eyes undressed you mid-conversation while you were still trying to form a coherent sentence. She conquered Broadway before Hollywood understood what to do with a woman whose appetites were this ungovernable. A stagehand from one of her productions described her dressing room after closing night as resembling a crime scene. Empty bottles littering the floor, clothes scattered like forensic evidence, and men wandering around with no memory of how they'd arrived or what they'd surrendered. Tallulah operated on a single principle. She took what she wanted, gender and marital status irrelevant. During one rehearsal period, she methodically seduced 5 cast members in 2 weeks, treating them like courses in a meal she fully intended to finish. When a nervous colleague suggested she was being reckless, she threw her head back, laughed that dark laugh, lit another cigarette, and growled that recklessness would be pretending she didn't know exactly what she craved. Then she moved on to number 6. Studio heads at Paramount, sweating through their suits, assigned handlers to control her. They drew up morality clauses with legal language designed to cage her. She ignored all of it, thoroughly and publicly. Men, women, married, single, legendary stars, unknown stagehands, the categories meant nothing. Cocaine, alcohol, and absolute sexual freedom weren't vices to hide. They were the brand she sold, decades before sexual liberation had a vocabulary, much less a movement. She once told a reporter, with diplomatic understatement, that she'd had many momentary love affairs climaxing in fashions not condoned by society. In private, the descriptions were anatomical, hilarious, and entirely unprintable. Her talent matched her hunger, and that saved her. You couldn't cancel someone who didn't recognize your authority to judge. She lived loudly, unapologetically, and died with a drink nearby, never once having offered an explanation. But while Tallulah turned her exploits into theater, our next icon was hiding a scientific mind behind a face so devastating that men couldn't see the calculator running behind her eyes. They called her the most beautiful woman in the world, and for once, the marketing wasn't a lie. That face could genuinely stop traffic. Studio executives forgot their own names in her presence, and every promise they'd made to their wives dissolved in the glow of her arrival. MGM sold her image everywhere, plastering those impossible features across a planet ready to worship. But behind those famous eyes, hidden beneath the surface of Samson and Delilah, was a machine that never stopped calculating. Hetty wasn't just processing her next scene. She was always measuring precisely what beauty could purchase in an economy where flesh was the hardest currency. A weary studio publicist admitted they could sell her face to the entire world, but could never sell the truth about what she did after midnight, who she did it with, and how many suspicious wives were waiting at home for husbands who'd been thoroughly compromised. Her system was elegant. Identify the most powerful man in every room, producer, director, executive. Make him feel like he alone had discovered her, like their connection was cosmic and singular. Then, once the transaction was complete, move to the next powerful man on the next production without a backward glance. During one shoot, an infatuated producer sent diamonds worth more than most Depression-era Americans earned in a lifetime. She accepted the jewels gracefully, wore them to set so everyone could witness her victory, then left that very night with the assistant director. The jewelry stayed in her collection. The producer's relevance expired. 6 marriages made the papers, but those were merely the public-facing events. The private ledger stretched far longer and far darker. Here's the tragedy layered over the scandal. While men reduced her to a body, she was inventing frequency-hopping technology, the foundational architecture that would eventually make Wi-Fi, GPS, and Bluetooth possible. She handed the patent to the Navy during World War II, hoping to help the Allied cause. They dismissed her, suggesting she'd be more useful selling war bonds with her face. So she used that body to survive in an industry that refused to see the genius inside it. She died in 2000, her technological contributions recognized only posthumously, the beauty having forever eclipsed the brain. Now, while Hetty calculated, our next diva simply dominated, climbing from a chorus line with an iron grip that left men discarded like used props. Joan Crawford started at the very bottom, just another body in the MGM chorus line, anonymous and desperate. But those shoulder pads she'd later make famous weren't the only sharp things about her. Her eyes could freeze a room solid. Her ambition could draw blood. She clawed her way upward with a ferocity that left casualties scattered across the studio lot, and her primary weapon was a complete reversal of the expected power dynamic. Early in her career, she slept with MGM executives because that was the toll required to escape the background. Once she had power, however, the game inverted entirely. She didn't just collect leading men, she dominated them, used them, and discarded them the moment their usefulness expired. A cinematographer who worked multiple Crawford pictures said she treated relationships like business transactions, each one entered with a contract in mind and terminated when a better deal appeared. Her affair with Clark Gable wasn't a fleeting on-set fling. It lasted for years, a sustained inferno that survived both their marriages, burning through multiple productions while their real spouses waited at home. The crew nicknamed them the Hot Couple, a recognition that the chemistry on screen required no acting whatsoever. Studio publicists manufactured fake friendship stories for the fan magazines while everyone in the soundstage knew the humiliating truth. For marriages punctuated her public timeline, but dozens of affairs filled the spaces between and frequently overlapped the marriages themselves. By the 1940s, having exhausted her peers, she began seducing younger actors, a calculated demonstration that her power hadn't faded with age. Her lifelong rival, Bette Davis, made a cruel but surgically accurate observation about Joan's methodology, about whose beds she visited on the climb upward, about how she weaponized sexuality more effectively than anyone in the industry. Her adopted children would later reveal that the iron grip she used on lovers matched the tyranny she inflicted at home. When Joan Crawford died in 1977, she was alone, estranged from everyone who'd once called her mother, lover, or friend. She'd used sex as a ladder, then as a cudgel, and in the end, had no one left to dominate. But while Joan burned bridges with fury, our final diva burned through marriages with a red-haired, technicolor flame that consumed even the most legendary men alive. Ava Gardner wasn't given the title, the world's most beautiful animal, by accident. That description acknowledged something primal, something predatory beneath the devastating symmetry of her face. She possessed a beauty so potent it didn't just attract men, it destroyed them, leaving wreckage that played out in tabloid headlines for decades. 3 official marriages barely hint at the chaos. Mickey Rooney, when she was barely an adult. Artie Shaw, the brilliant bandleader, discarded like a used melody. Finally, Frank Sinatra, in a mutual immolation so intense it nearly killed him twice, 2 suicide attempts directly attributed to the torment of loving and losing her. But marriages were merely the public-facing disasters. The real devastation happened on location. A crew member who worked multiple Gardner films said watching Ava arrive on set was like observing a predator scanning a watering hole. She'd assess the room, pick her target, and by the wrap party, that man would be leaving his wife. By her next production, she'd have moved on, leaving him standing in the ruins of his former life. During Magambo filming in Africa, her affair with a co-star became so loud and so consuming that the legendary director John Ford had to separate their shooting schedules entirely. It didn't matter. They found each other at night in her canvas tent, while the rest of the crew stared at the ceiling, trying desperately to ignore the sounds coming through those thin walls. In 1950 Spain, she discovered bullfighters and began collecting matadors like erotic souvenirs, her Madrid villa becoming notorious for late-night visits from men still dressed in their suits of lights. George C. Scott's obsession with her turned so dark it required a restraining order. She admitted in her autobiography, with brutal honesty, "I haven't lived like Starr. I've lived like a man." The double standard haunted her. Men celebrated such conquests. She was judged for them. Near the end, broke in London despite earning millions, she was still seducing men half her age, the appetite undimmed by time or consequence. She died alone in 1990 at 67, caged finally by the very appetites that had once made her feel so free. And now we return to the beginning, to the sweater girl whose appetites led not just to broken hearts, but to a dead body on her bedroom floor, the story we started with, and the one that, above all others, proves these divas played for the highest possible stakes. We close with the love goddess herself, the redhead whose pin-up poster hung in barracks worldwide, her technicolor glow promising a fantasy that millions of soldiers carried into battle. Rita Hayworth's image was perfection. The cascading auburn hair, the satin gown and Gilda, that knowing smile suggesting pleasures beyond a camera's reach. But the woman trapped inside that goddess marketing was a bottomless well of need, and she used men just as ruthlessly as the studio system used her image. 5 marriages headlined the papers, but a weary Columbia Pictures executive once revealed the deeper truth. Rita isn't difficult. She's simply insatiable. She never stops wanting more attention, more passion, more proof that she is desired above all others. The pattern on her film sets was clockwork. Co-star becomes lover during principal photography. Intense, all-consuming affair dominates the production. Cameras stop rolling, and the relationship evaporates like desert rain. Crew members learned not to invest emotionally in whoever occupied her trailer, because the next picture would bring a fresh face and a fresh scandal. During Gilda filming, her chemistry with her leading man wasn't performance, it was documented reality. He was married. She genuinely didn't care. Columbia's fixers ran interference, answering difficult questions from his wife, while Rita smiled for the publicity stills and continued the affair straight through post-production. When the film wrapped, so did the relationship, with surgical finality. She married Prince Ali Khan in 1949, briefly becoming actual royalty. Even a crown couldn't satisfy what she was chasing. Marriages to increasingly younger men followed, each more desperate to fill a void that seemed to expand with every attempt. She famously said, "They went to bed with Gilda and woke up with me," the most quoted line of her career, a lament that the fantasy always disappointed. But Rita also went to bed with fantasies, chasing phantoms of passion in strangers' arms, and she woke up with emptiness every single time. 61 films cemented her legend, but the love goddess image became a prison from which she never escaped. She used her sexuality as both weapon and shield, yet neither protected her from the final tragedy. Dying alone with Alzheimer's in 1987, her memory erased, unable to recall a single one of the men she'd loved, used, or destroyed along the way.